The markets crashed in silence. No sirens, no screams, just cold numbers dripping red across digital tickers. In a sunlit office on Wall Street, Amelia Chen stared at her screen as 47 billion vanished in under 90 seconds. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "It's gone." Around the world, pensioners in Tokyo, teachers in London, and factory workers in Ohio watched their futures dissolve without warning. The cameras caught none of it. Behind the scenes, somewhere in a glass tower above Manhattan, an algorithm blinked, executing trades faster than the human mind could comprehend. This wasn't a glitch. It was precision. Calculated move buried within layers of code, controlled by a firm that doesn't scream its name, but echoes through every financial corner of the globe. The question is no longer what happened. It's who allowed it to happen. And behind that lies a name known to the powerful, feared by the silent, BlackRock. In 1999, BlackRock was just another asset manager among hundreds. But with the launch of Aladdin, an AI system built to oversee trillions in assets, it quietly transformed. What began as a risk management tool evolved into the pulse monitor of global finance. Aladdin doesn't sleep, doesn't hesitate, and makes decisions in nanoseconds. A whisper from its output can shake a nation's economy. Behind every pension, mortgage, or government bond lies a decision made by a code no one voted for. This isn't conspiracy, it's capitalism's ultimate evolution. What shocks isn't that BlackRock controls this system. What shocks is how few people even know it exists. Amelia said, "It felt like playing chess blindfolded while the opponent sees the future." Across capitals and corporate boardrooms, BlackRock's influence seeped in unnoticed, until it was too late. Government bailouts, housing crises, energy regulation, each bore the imprint of its quiet hand. Through advisory roles, private consulting, and shadow ownership, BlackRock advised both sides of every negotiation. Imagine a player acting as both referee and champion. In one crisis, it was hired to fix the problem that it helped create. They weren't the wolves, said one insider. They were the forest. By the time regulators noticed, the vines had already coiled around every pillar of modern finance. And at the heart of it all, Aladdin kept watching. Financial regulators often speak in cautious tones, yet their eyes betray fear when BlackRock is mentioned. In 2008, during the collapse, governments begged the firm for insight. It became both firefighter and arsonist. They saw what we couldn't, one Treasury official admitted. And we had no choice but to listen. These were no longer bankers, they were algorithmic priests speaking in data tongues. As economies faltered, only one player stood tall, absorbing the chaos and growing from it. Bailouts happened. Stocks rebounded. But, for the average citizen, recovery never arrived. What began as an emergency measure birthed a new kind of monarchy, data-driven, unelected, and unaccountable. Amelia stood alone by the Hudson, the city buzzing behind her. How can one company touch so many lives and still remain unseen? She asked. The wind caught her voice as if trying to steal it away. It wasn't just the money. It was the silence. The way no one warned them. The way no one could explain it. The crash wasn't just a loss of wealth, it was a loss of trust. As she walked away, a single line echoed in her mind, something she heard once during training. BlackRock isn't the market, it's the mind behind it. And in that moment, the world shifted, not with an explosion, but with a whisper. Amelia wasn't alone. Across continents, whispers turned into murmurs. In a suburb of Berlin, Klaus Bauer, a retired engineer, stared at a foreclosure notice pinned to his mailbox. "But I paid on time," he mumbled, confusion fighting with despair. His pension fund had collapsed overnight. In São Paulo, Maria Helena, a single mother, faced a silent hospital corridor. The oncology wing had lost its funding. Her daughter's treatment halted, not because of policy but because a bond somewhere went unpaid. The tragedy wasn't loud. It was slow, methodical, and invisible. BlackRock didn't pull levers dramatically. it shifted weight. Amelia once read, "Power doesn't shout, it hums through systems." And now that hum echoed in the lives of millions who never saw it coming. Klaus had trusted the system. He worked 42 years, invested safely, and lived humbly. But when his pension fund was restructured by an asset reshuffling, no one explained, everything unraveled. His emails went unanswered. His bank said, "It's out of our hands." The headline spoke of global shifts and market realignments, but for Klaus it meant empty shelves and unpaid bills. His daughter begged him to move in. He declined. "I followed every rule," he whispered. "Why did the rules betray me?" And somewhere, a file in a New York server logged another transaction, cold, precise, and blind to tears. Maria Helena's story mirrored countless others. The funding behind her daughter's treatment had come from a health bond, which in turn was backed by municipal investment funds, managed quietly by BlackRock. When interest rates shifted and the algorithm reallocated capital, the hospital lost its liquidity. No warning, no negotiation. A faceless decision made in milliseconds. Oh. Maria stood beside her daughter's hospital bed, a volunteer nurse apologizing. "The system's frozen," she said. But Maria only saw the IV drip slowing to a halt. "You can't algorithm away a heartbeat," she murmured. But outside that ward, the world moved on. Efficient, optimized, and utterly indifferent. BlackRock's influence didn't just trickle down. It seeped in, shaping public policy without elections, guiding fiscal decisions without faces. In Washington, Senator Harris stared at the brief on his desk, advisory support from BlackRock on national infrastructure. He shook his head, recalling a closed-door meeting months earlier where no minutes were recorded. "Who decides when the advisors become the architects?" he had asked. But no one answered. Politicians needed their models. Economists needed their insights. And the public? They only saw the symptoms: rising rents, closed clinics, vanishing jobs. It wasn't corruption. It was cooperation. A new kind of empire, not ruled by kings, but data consultants. Amelia compiled the stories, Klaus, Maria, and countless others. She filled a private folder labeled "Collateral Damage." Each entry wasn't just a case, it was a scar. She printed them, stacked them, and mailed them anonymously to regulators, journalists, and activists. Most never responded. A few asked for sources. One envelope was returned unopened. Still, she kept collecting. "It's not about changing the system," she wrote in her journal. "It's about refusing to pretend it's invisible." That night, she sat by her window, looking down at a city bathed in artificial calm. Somewhere beneath the quiet hum of traffic and neon, the algorithm kept whispering. It started subtly. A sudden hike in rent here. A closed school there. Then came the protests: Madrid, Johannesburg, Los Angeles. In each case the spark was different, but the fire felt the same. People were losing ground in their own lives while someone else profited from the erosion. In Barcelona, young professionals camped outside abandoned properties, holding signs reading, "Homes, not assets." The properties had been bundled and sold, part of a housing portfolio managed by none other than BlackRock. "They don't see tenants," said one activist. "They see line items." The crowd chanted through the night, unaware that decisions affecting their homes were being made on the 42nd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper. The reach extended beyond real estate. In Africa, water supplies were privatized. In Southeast Asia, energy grids were modernized. In truth, ownership was shifting from public hands into portfolios. A Zambian hydropower plant, once a national symbol, was now held by an entity 2 layers beneath a BlackRock subsidiary. Local workers lost their jobs as automation rolled in. "They call it investment," said union leader Kofi Mensah, "but it feels like colonization in a new uniform." Still, the firm remained quiet, cloaked in shareholder language and quarterly reports. What couldn't be debated was this: wherever BlackRock arrived, control changed hands. And not always for the better. Amelia cross-referenced news cycles with asset purchases. A curious pattern emerged. Every time a crisis hit, BlackRock gained. Whether it was a pandemic, a regional war, or an environmental disaster, capital flowed, not out of, but into their funds. In a quiet call with a former colleague, she asked, "Do they just respond faster? Or do they know before the rest of us?" The line went silent. "It's not insider trading," he finally said. "It's insight at scale." And that insight was being sold, packaged through predictive analytics, behavioral forecasting, and machine-generated sentiment reports. The markets were no longer reacting to reality. They were preempting it. Not everyone stayed silent. In Brussels, journalist Elodie Marchand began publishing a series of exposés titled The Invisible Hand. She tracked how BlackRock secured quiet seats on advisory boards, how former executives now steered EU policy, how influence seeped through handshakes and strategic guidance. Her writing was clinical, never conspiratorial, but its implications were damning. She received threats. Her editor warned her to slow down. "They don't need to silence you," he said. "They just need to make you feel watched." "Still," she continued, "the public deserves to know," Elodie wrote. "When power hides behind complexity, journalism becomes resistance." And yet, despite the data, the protests, the exposés, nothing changed. Governments hesitated. Institutions deferred. Regulators drowned in jargon. BlackRock remained untouchable. Amelia stared at a photo pinned on her wall, a map marked with red pins, each one a site of impact. "We're not fighting a company," she realized. "We're fighting an architecture." It wasn't just money. It was access, timing, narrative, algorithms too vast for oversight. She picked up the phone and dialed Elodie. "Are you ready to go public?" she asked. There was a pause. Then quietly, "We don't have a choice." In the background, the server room's hum never stopped. Aladdin wasn't just a platform. It was the mind. It analyzed risk for over 200 institutions, managed assets across 60 countries, and connected central banks with private firms. To some, it was a tool. To BlackRock, it was leverage. Each time a fund used Aladdin, it unknowingly shared its data, market movements, stress tests, asset positions. That information fed back into the system, sharpening BlackRock's predictive edge. "It's like every chess player uploading their strategies into the same brain," said one analyst. But Aladdin wasn't sentient. It simply followed commands. The question was, who programmed the commands? And why was no one asking what the system was optimizing for? Amelia traced corporate disclosures and discovered a web. BlackRock didn't just own shares, it owned influence. In dozens of Fortune 500 companies, it held minority stakes that carried disproportionate voting power. Through passive index funds, it voted on climate policies, board appointments, executive pay. Publicly, it claimed neutrality. But in practice, it leaned toward stability, toward growth. Even if that meant favoring fossil fuels over climate reforms, or monopolies over competition. "It's not malevolent," a former executive confessed. "It's just dispassionate." Yet decisions made in quarterly boardrooms trickled down into forest fires, shuttered small businesses, and broken communities. Influence without accountability. Power without fingerprints. In Washington and Brussels, BlackRock's former executives now advised on monetary policy. In the UK, it guided green energy transitions. In Canada, it shaped pension reform. Elodie's research showed a revolving door. Public servants turned consultants, then returned to government. Contracts were awarded, strategies were aligned. "They call it advisory," she wrote, "but it functions as quiet governance. No votes, and shall. No debate. Just integration." One memo even noted, recommendations align with stakeholder frameworks. But who defined those frameworks? Who approved the values coded into the models? The algorithm didn't wear a crown, but it ruled all the same. In a secure room beneath BlackRock's New York headquarters, a private session unfolded. No cameras, no transcript. Amelia, now invited as a consultant, sat across from a panel of portfolio architects. They didn't speak in emotions. They spoke in volatility spreads and liquidity paths. Markets don't like morality, one said. They like certainty. The models showed where to pull out of renewable projects, where to inject capital into defense, where housing scarcity could boost returns. It's not personal, the analyst added. It's systemic. Amelia stared at the charts. Behind the blinking numbers she saw lives, each blip a home, a hospital, a hope. She walked out before the meeting ended. Outside, the city pulsed unaware. In Times Square, digital billboards praised economic resilience, while below, a man slept beneath a poster of a BlackRock ETF. The world didn't see a villain. It didn't see anything. Because the genius of BlackRock wasn't its size, it was its invisibility. Like oxygen, it was everywhere, and understood by almost no one. Amelia watched people walk by, phones glowing, dreams flickering. "You can't protest what you don't know exists," she whispered. But now she knew. And knowing demanded action. The next step wasn't easy. It wasn't loud. But it would be real. Her silence had ended. The architecture was exposed. It started with a leak. A whistleblower inside a Swiss data firm shared an internal email thread. BlackRock's Aladdin system had quietly partnered with a military-grade surveillance AI. The intent? Not just market prediction, but social behavior forecasting. Protests. Pandemics. Political swings. Ning. Amelia stared at the email's subject line, precursor simulation, public sentiment monitoring. The document revealed patterns used to predict, and sometimes preempt, civil unrest in regions where BlackRock had heavy investment. "You're telling me they saw protests before they began?" Elodie asked. Amelia nodded. And they adjusted portfolios accordingly. The game was no longer about risk. It was about prophecy. Elodie dove deeper. The simulation logs didn't just observe. They altered outcomes. One entry showed funds strategically pulled from education sectors in anticipation of low ROI due to upcoming labor strikes. In Chile, a school funding crisis erupted days later. "They don't just adapt," Elodie said. "They exploit." But it was the next file that chilled her. A projection model tagged asset repricing after controlled civil stabilization. It wasn't confirmation of intervention, but it was close. "What if the system isn't neutral?" she asked. "What if it's engineered to provoke?" The line between prediction and manipulation blurred. And suddenly, the narrative of a silent observer shattered. Amelia confronted a former BlackRock advisor at a rooftop bar in Midtown Manhattan. His name was Marcus Lang, now a consultant in risk governance. She laid out the data. He didn't deny it. "Aladdin doesn't manipulate," he said. "But people do. People who know how to use the system better than governments do." She asked, "Do you realize what that means?" Marcus sipped his drink, eyes lost in the skyline. "It means power is no longer political," he said. "It's computational." Silence lingered. Then he added, "If you publish this, they'll drown it in data. They'll bury the signal." Amelia stood, her decision already made. "Then we amplify the signal." They published it all. The emails, the forecasts, the simulation logs. An encrypted archive spread through global investigative networks. Within hours, headlines exploded. Financial giant using AI to anticipate civil unrest. BlackRock's predictive reach raises global alarm. Stockholders panicked. Governments demanded hearings. Amelia watched it unfold from her apartment, phone buzzing endlessly. But the victory was short-lived. The next day, BlackRock's spokesperson dismissed it all as misrepresented proprietary research. Major outlets softened their language. The online outrage dulled under the pressure of institutional calm. The leak hadn't broken the system. It had exposed its resilience. Truth, it seemed, wasn't enough. That night, Amelia opened her inbox. Hundreds of emails poured in. Some from journalists, others from frightened insiders. But most were from ordinary people. Teachers, nurses, students. "Thank you," one wrote. "I knew something was off. I just didn't know what." The twist wasn't the leak. The twist was the awakening. Across forums, town halls, classrooms, people were finally asking the right questions. Who decides? What drives the algorithm? Why didn't we see this sooner? The answers wouldn't come easily. But the illusion was cracked. The silence was broken. In the shadow of a trillion-dollar empire, the world had begun to stir. The hearings began in Geneva. A coalition of investigative journalists, whistleblowers, and former regulators presented their findings before the International Finance Oversight Council. Amelia testified first. "This isn't about numbers," she said. "It's about invisible governance." Screens behind her lit up with simulation logs, financial maps, and policy overlaps. The chairwoman asked, "Are you suggesting BlackRock manipulates world governments?" Amelia replied, "No, I'm saying they don't have to." The room fell silent. Power doesn't always coerce. Sometimes it just defines the playing field. And in this game, the rules were written in code, reviewed by no one, answerable to nothing. Markets trembled, not from regulation, but from uncertainty. For once, the algorithm hadn't seen this coming. Aladdin flagged anomalies in public behavior, divestment campaigns, user boycotts, social asset withdrawals. "They're rejecting our models," one portfolio manager said. At BlackRock's Manhattan headquarters, an emergency meeting was called. Marcus Lang was there, silent among the suits. "Do we respond?" a director asked. Another said, "No, this isn't a market correction. It's a narrative fracture." Algorithms worked on trends, not truth. And for the first time, the public had disrupted the trend. Not by protest, but by refusing to comply. Elodie broadcast live that night. No scripts, no teleprompters, just a single camera and her voice. "This is not a call for revolt," she said. "It's a call for accountability." She recited numbers, statistics, names. But what mattered most was her gaze, direct, unblinking, human. Across continents, people tuned in. Her words were subtitled in 18 languages within 48 hours. She ended with a question: "What happens when the system we built begins to feed on us?" A moment of silence followed. Then, the feed cut to black. And in that blackness, millions of viewers finally saw the architecture that had always stood in plain sight. BlackRock didn't fall. But something cracked. Universities ended quiet partnerships. Small countries withdrew advisory contracts. An Aladdin subsidiary spun off quietly, renamed, rebranded. The firm responded with elegant deflection, adjusting to shifting stakeholder landscapes. But inside, the code was being rewritten. Risk models changed. Transparency toggles were added. Not because of law, because of scrutiny. Because someone finally looked behind the curtain. And though the machine still moved, it now did so under a different kind of pressure. Not from markets, but from eyes. Watching, questioning, refusing to forget. The algorithm remained, but it could no longer hide. Amelia stood outside the BlackRock tower one last time. No signs, no press, just her, and the glass monolith rising into a gray sky. A part of her wanted closure. But another part knew this was never about endings. It was about awareness. Behind her the city moved on, traders rushed, taxis honked, screens blinked. Yet something had changed. Not the system, but the gaze that now rested upon it. "They still hold the cards," Elodie had said. "But now at least we know the game." Amelia turned and walked away. Not defeated. Not victorious. Just awake. And that perhaps was the beginning of everything. Weeks passed. Then, months. The noise quieted. Headlines moved on. But the world was different, subtly, undeniably. Investment apps now displayed ownership transparency tabs. Terms like algorithmic equity appeared in public discourse. And for the first time, shareholders began asking not just how returns were made, but at whose cost. In South Korea, a university divested from BlackRock managed fossil funds. In Ghana, students held forums on algorithmic capitalism. The empire hadn't fallen, but it had been named. And naming, as Amelia once wrote in her journal, is the first step to dismantling invisibility. Truth wasn't a revolution. It was a ripple. And ripples grow. Elodie returned to Brussels a different woman. She no longer wrote for bylines. She spoke at assemblies. At a youth summit, she stood before a crowd of hundreds. "It's not about canceling," she said. "It's about choosing. Who you bank with, who you vote for, what you tolerate." The audience, diverse and engaged, listened intently. Systems don't vanish, but they can be reshaped. Her voice carried not with anger, but conviction. Cameras recorded every word. Not for virality, but for permanence. The tide didn't crash that day. It shifted. Quietly, methodically, like all meaningful change does, rooted not in fear, but understanding. Marcus Lang resigned quietly. No statement. No press. Just a quiet departure from a system he once believed in. He moved to Vermont, took a job teaching financial ethics. In his first class he wrote on the board, "Who does your money serve?" The students stared, puzzled. "That's the question you'll answer before you leave this room." He no longer saw the world as systems and forecasts. He saw it as stories, interwoven, vulnerable, vital. He knew BlackRock wasn't alone. But maybe, just maybe, someone could build something better. Not perfect, but better. And that's where change always begins, not with answers, but with new questions. Back in New York, Amelia no longer tracked headlines. She planted a garden on her rooftop. Each morning she watered basil, tomatoes, and sunflowers. It wasn't escape, it was return. To agency. To silence that wasn't synthetic. A neighbor once asked what she did for a living. She smiled and said, "I ask uncomfortable questions." At night, she still wrote, quiet essays, unsigned letters, seeds for future awakenings. Her story wasn't one of victory or defeat. It was one of reclamation. Of her time. Her gaze. Her voice. Because when power hides behind silence, remembering how to speak becomes the first rebellion. BlackRock still exists. Aladdin still runs. The world remains wired through money, code, and systems too complex to untangle overnight. But now it's seen. And in that seeing, power shifts. Not to governments. Not to corporations. But to people who choose to notice. This isn't the end of the story. It's the moment before the next page. Before the next whisper, trade, or vote. Or the next question we dare to ask. Who governs the world? Isn't a conspiracy. It's a mirror. And for those brave enough to look into it, the real revolution begins, not with force but with sight.